She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just stood there frozen as his words cut deeper than the hot coffee that had spilled on his suit. In the middle of a busy Lagos street, a poor hotel cleaner was being humiliated by a powerful man who believed time, money, and status placed him above human error. People stared. Some whispered. No one defended her. She bowed her head, apologizing again and again, knowing that one wrong moment could cost her the only job standing between her family and hunger. He walked away, convinced she was nothing more than a careless inconvenience. But what he didn't know was that same exhausted woman would soon enter his private world in a way neither of them could have imagined. And when power meets humility, someone always changes. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories of injustice, love, and redemption move you, don't forget to subscribe. Jabari Adeyemi had built his entire life around one unbreakable rule. Mistakes were unacceptable. In his world, there was no room for excuses, no patience for weakness, and certainly no tolerance for carelessness. From a young age, he had been trained to win. While other children played in dusty streets after school, Jabari sat in air-conditioned rooms memorizing numbers, contracts, and expectations that were far heavier than his age. By 32, he was already one of Nigeria's youngest billionaires, the sole heir to an empire his late father had spent decades constructing. Adeyemi Global Holdings stretched across banking, oil, logistics, real estate, and international trade. Thousands of families depended on its stability. Millions of dollars moved with a single signature of his pen. And today, of all days, everything depended on him. The meeting he was rushing toward was not just another corporate appointment. Foreign investors from Europe and the Middle East were waiting at a luxury hotel not far from where the accident had happened. If Jabari succeeded, Adeyemi Global would officially step onto the global stage. If he failed, rivals would smell blood, employees would panic, and the board would begin to question whether the son was truly worthy of the father's throne. That was why he had been furious. Not mildly annoyed. Furious. To Jabari, time was sacred. Discipline was oxygen. Perfection was survival. And that morning, when his driver called to say Lagos traffic had turned the expressway into a parking lot, something inside him had already begun to boil. He had stepped out of the car without hesitation, ignoring the stares that followed his tailored suit and polished shoes. A man like him did not explain himself to the crowd, so when the coffee collided with his chest, hot, sudden, humiliating, it felt like the universe mocking him. As Jabari walked away from the scene, his jaw tight and his steps sharp, his mind replayed the moment again and again. The stain on his shirt, the gasp from the girl, the eyes of strangers watching him lose control. He hated that more than anything, not the burn, not the mess, but the loss of control. Inside the hotel restroom minutes later, he stared at his reflection. The mirror showed a man who looked calm on the outside but fractured within. The expensive shirt was ruined. The meeting suit chosen weeks in advance was useless. He clenched his fists, anger simmering just beneath the surface. How could one careless girl ruin months of preparation, he muttered. The meeting confirmed his worst fears. The investors were polite, but distant. They listened, nodded, and exchanged glances that Jabari knew too well. Doubt, hesitation, calculation. He delivered his presentation flawlessly, but the rhythm was broken. The confidence that usually filled the room was thinner, strained. By the time the meeting ended, no contracts were signed. No handshakes lingered. Jabari returned to his presidential suite late that night, carrying more than disappointment. He carried rage, exhaustion, and something else he refused to name, a faint sense of unease. He loosened his tie, tossed his jacket aside, and moved through the quiet luxury of the room like a man on autopilot. The city lights of Lagos blinked outside his window, vibrant and alive, but Jabari felt disconnected from it all. For the first time in years, success had slipped slightly out of reach, and the thought irritated him more than he cared to admit. He showered, changed into a simple shirt, and prepared to collapse into bed. Sleep was usually his reset button. One night of rest and his mind would sharpen again. Control would return. He turned on the lights and froze. There in the middle of his king-sized bed lay a woman fast asleep. For a second, Jabari thought his exhaustion had finally betrayed him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible image before him. A stranger, in his bed, in his private suite, his sanctuary. Then he noticed the uniform, the faded hotel cleaner's outfit, the cleaning cart parked carelessly near the door. The limp posture of a body that had clearly given up from fatigue, not rebellion. Shock turned into anger with terrifying speed. "What is this?" he barked, striding forward. "Hey, wake up!" The woman stirred, her eyes snapping open in panic. She bolted upright, confusion flooding her face. It took only a second for reality to crash over her. She was not in an empty room. She was not on her feet. She was on the bed of the most powerful guest in the hotel. "Oh God, sir, I'm so sorry," she cried, scrambling to stand. Her legs buckled slightly and she grabbed the bedpost to steady herself. "I didn't mean to. I was cleaning and I just—" "You fainted," Jabari interrupted sharply. "Do you think I'm stupid?" His voice echoed against the polished walls. The woman trembled, tears welling in her eyes as fear replaced confusion. "Please," she whispered. "I was so tired. I didn't even know I lay down. I swear, sir, I would never." "That's enough," Jabari snapped, already reaching for the phone. "You've crossed a line." Within minutes, hotel security flooded the room, followed by the night manager. The woman Zuri Okori stood silently near the wall, her head bowed, hands clenched in front of her. Shame wrapped around her like a heavy coat. Jabari explained everything with cold precision. The morning accident, the ruined meeting, and now this. To him, it all felt connected, like a chain of disruption centered around one careless worker. The manager listened carefully, then pulled Jabari aside. "Sir," he said quietly, "this girl is one of our hardest workers. She's been covering double shifts for weeks. Her younger sister is ill. She collapsed from exhaustion. I can personally assure you this was not intentional." Jabari glanced back at Zuri. For the first time, he truly looked at her, not as an inconvenience, not as an employee, but as a human being. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if carrying invisible weight. The fear not of punishment alone, but of losing everything. Something in his chest tightened. "Let her go," he said finally. His tone was calm but distant. "Just keep her away from my room." Security escorted Zuri out and the door closed softly behind her. Jabari sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. The room felt strangely empty now. He told himself it was irritation, nothing more, that she would be forgotten by morning. But as the lights dimmed and the city hummed outside, her face refused to leave his mind. Zuri Okori did not cry as security escorted her down the quiet hallway. Not because she wasn't afraid and not because her heart wasn't breaking, but because crying had never changed anything in her life. Tears did not pay rent. Tears did not buy medicine. Tears did not keep sick children alive. She waited until the elevator doors closed before letting out a slow, shaky breath. This was her world. Humiliation swallowed, fear hidden, dignity guarded like a fragile flame that could go out with one wrong step. By the time she reached the service floor, her legs felt weak. The adrenaline that had kept her standing in that room was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix. Zuri leaned against the wall for a moment, closing her eyes, forcing herself to stay upright. She still had work to finish. Rooms to clean, floors to mop, because tomorrow her sister would still be sick. Zuri's life had never followed a straight line. She was raised in a cramped neighborhood on the outskirts of Lagos where houses leaned into each other like tired bodies and children learned early how to survive without complaining. Their parents had died years apart, first her father in a construction accident, then her mother after a long illness that drained every naira they had saved. From that moment on, Zuri became more than a sister. She became a guardian. Lami, her younger sister, had been only 9 when everything fell apart. Now she was 12, thin and fragile, her laughter quieter than it used to be. A respiratory condition left her coughing through the night, gasping for air when the humidity rose. The doctors said she needed consistent medication, regular checkups, and rest. But rest was a luxury Zuri could not afford. She worked at the hotel 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Morning shifts blended into night shifts. On days when another cleaner called in sick, Zuri volunteered without hesitation. Overtime meant extra money. Extra money meant another week of medicine. Another week meant survival. Her uniform was faded from endless washing. The seams had been stitched and restitched so many times she had lost count. Every morning she ironed it, carefully smoothing out wrinkles as if presentation could protect her from judgment. She tied her hair neatly, wiped her shoes clean, and walked into work with her head high, even when her body begged her to stop. The coffee incident replayed in her mind as she pushed her cleaning cart into the laundry room. She could still hear his voice. Sharp, cutting, public. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know he was a billionaire. To her, he was just another man in a hurry who believed her existence was an inconvenience. And maybe that hurt the most. Later that night, after clocking out, Zuri walked the long way home. The streets were dim, lit by flickering bulbs and generator lights. Vendors packed up leftovers. Children chased each other barefoot, laughing despite everything. Life continued, indifferent to exhaustion. Her one-room home greeted her with silence and heat. She set her bag down quietly, careful not to wake Lami. But the coughing had already started. Zuri moved to her sister's side, sitting on the thin mattress, rubbing her back gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here." Lami's eyes opened weakly. "Did you bring the medicine?" Zuri hesitated for just a second before forcing a smile. "Tomorrow," she said softly. The pharmacy was closed late. Lami nodded, trusting her completely. That trust felt heavier than any burden Zuri had ever carried. That night, Zuri barely slept. Her muscles ached. Her mind raced. The thought of being fired haunted her. The hotel paid more than most places. If she lost that job, there was no backup plan, no safety net. The next morning, she returned to work before sunrise. Her supervisor barely looked at her as she signed in. No mention of the incident. No warning. No dismissal. Relief washed over her, slow and fragile. But the whispers began almost immediately. She slept in a guest's bed. Is that how she earns extra tips? Careful. That man looks dangerous. Zuri heard every word, but she said nothing. She focused on her tasks, moving quietly from floor to floor. She refused to let gossip steal what little strength she had left. When she passed room 1201 later that morning, her heart skipped. She avoided the door, pushing her cart forward quickly. She did not want to see him again. But fate had other plans. Around mid-morning, her supervisor called her name. Zuri, room 1201. Her hands tightened around the handle of her cart. "Yes, ma'am, he requested you." Zuri felt the air leave her lungs. "Me?" she asked softly. The supervisor shrugged. "Just do your job, and be careful." The walk to the suite felt longer than ever. With every step, her heart pounded louder. She replayed every possible mistake in her head, bracing herself for punishment. When she knocked, the door opened almost immediately. He stood there, composed, dressed in a crisp suit with no tie. His expression was unreadable. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Sir," Zuri replied, eyes lowered. She entered quietly, placing the breakfast tray on the table with careful precision. Her hands trembled despite her efforts to steady them. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late," she answered honestly. He watched her for a moment, then spoke again. "Your hands shake when you're nervous." Zuri froze. "I'm sorry, sir." He said nothing else. When she left, her heart was racing. She expected nothing more than silence. But when she later opened the small envelope left on the service tray, she gasped. 5,000 naira. More than she earned in 2 days. Her first instinct was fear. Why would he do this? Was it pity, a test, a trap? The next day it happened again. And the day after that, breakfast, lunch, dinner, always her. The whispers grew louder. Suspicion followed her through the halls like a shadow. Zuri's pride warred with her need. She needed the money, but not at the cost of her dignity. By the 4th day, exhaustion pressed heavier than ever. And yet something in his eyes had changed. The anger was gone. In its place was something quieter, something watchful. Zuri did not know it yet, but her quiet endurance had begun to undo a man who had built his life on control. By the end of that week, Jabari Adeyemi no longer blamed the coffee stain for his ruined mood. The shirt had been replaced, the meeting rescheduled, the investors cautiously optimistic again. On paper, everything was recovering, but inside him something was off. He noticed it in the small pauses that interrupted his thoughts, in the way his attention drifted during phone calls, in how his eyes instinctively turned toward the door each morning, waiting for a soft knock he pretended not to care about. Zuri. The name sat quietly in his mind, unwelcome yet persistent. That night, after another long day of negotiations and endless emails, Jabari returned to his presidential suite later than usual. The hotel was quieter now, its hallways dimmed, the luxury muted by the hour. He loosened his collar as he walked, fatigue settling into his bones. He should have gone home. His mansion was only a short drive away, silent, controlled, untouched by inconvenience. Yet he had stayed. Again, as he entered the suite, the faint scent of cleaning detergent lingered in the air, barely noticeable but unmistakable. The room was spotless as always. The bed neatly made, the curtains drawn just enough to reveal the blinking city beyond. Jabari moved toward the minibar, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. His reflection in the mirror looked tired. Not physically, he had looked tired for years, but something deeper. A weariness he could not quantify. He thought of Zuri's hands, how they shook even when she tried to steady them, how she never met his eyes for too long, how she spoke only when spoken to, yet listened as if every word mattered. He shook his head, slightly annoyed at himself. "She's just an employee," he muttered. But his body did not believe the lie. Jabari turned off the lights and moved toward the bedroom. As he did, his foot brushed against something near the door. He looked down. A cleaning cart, his brows furrowed. That wasn't right. Before he could process the detail, he heard a soft sound, a slow, uneven breath. His heart skipped. Jabari reached for the lamp and switched it on. There on his bed lay Zuri. She was curled slightly on her side, her uniform still on one arm, clutching a folded cloth as if it were an anchor. Her shoes sat neatly by the bed, placed with the same care she gave everything else. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, Jabari could not move. The room felt smaller, charged with tension. His first instinct was disbelief. His second was fury. What is she doing here, he thought. He stepped closer, his movements sharp. "Hey," he said loudly. "Hey." Zuri stirred, her brow creasing. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open. Confusion came first, then recognition. Her body jerked upright as panic flooded her features. She looked around wildly, then down at the bed beneath her. "Oh, no, no, no," she whispered, scrambling to her feet. "Sir, I'm so sorry." "I didn't mean to explain," Jabari snapped, his voice echoing against the walls. "I was cleaning," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "I felt dizzy. I thought I could just rest for 1 second. I didn't know I fell asleep. I swear, sir, I would never." "You fainted," he cut in. In my bed, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't plan it, please believe me. Jabari stared at her, anger rising like a familiar shield. To him, boundaries were sacred, privacy was power. And this felt like invasion. You've crossed a line, he said coldly, reaching for his phone. This is unacceptable. Zuri's breath hitched. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this, I need this job. But Jabari had already dialed. Within minutes, security arrived, followed by the night manager. The room filled with unfamiliar faces and professional distance. Zuri stood near the wall, her hands clenched tightly together, her shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. Jabari explained everything with controlled irritation. The manager listened carefully, nodding slowly. Sir, the manager said after a pause, may I speak with you privately? They stepped aside. She's one of our most reliable cleaners. The manager continued quietly. She's been working double shifts nearly every day. Her sister is seriously ill. She collapsed from exhaustion. I take full responsibility. Jabari glanced back at Zuri. She stood motionless, eyes fixed on the floor. Not defiant, not manipulative, just tired. Really tired. For the first time since he'd met her, Jabari felt his certainty waver. He looked closer, the dark shadows under her eyes, the way her lips trembled even as she tried to remain composed. The smell of detergent on her clothes mixed with something faintly human, fear, perhaps. He exhaled slowly. Let her go, he said at last. But I don't want this happening again. Yes, sir, the manager replied, relieved. Security gently escorted Zuri out. As she passed Jabari, she paused for a fraction of a second. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Then she was gone. The door closed. Silence settled over the suite like a heavy blanket. Jabari sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. The anger that had fueled him moments earlier felt misplaced now. He replayed the scene in his mind, not the violation, but the collapse, the way her body had simply given up. He had seen exhaustion before, in junior analysts pulling all-nighters, in executives chasing deadlines. But this was different. This was survival-level fatigue. The kind that came from choosing between sleep and survival and losing either way. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Why did he care? He had dealt with hundreds of employees, thousands even. He had fired people without blinking. He had walked past suffering without slowing his stride. Yet this one woman, this quiet cleaner, had shaken something loose. Jabari turned onto his side, the pillow cool beneath his cheek. He told himself it was irritation, that the disruption to his routine was the cause of his restlessness. But when he closed his eyes, it wasn't boardrooms or contracts he saw. It was Zuri's face. And for the first time in years, sleep did not come easily. Morning arrived without relief for Zuri Okorie. Her body moved before her mind was fully awake, trained by years of routine that did not allow space for fear or reflection. She washed her face with cold water, tied her hair back neatly, and stared at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. The woman looking back seemed older than her years. Her eyes carried too much weight for someone barely past her 20s. She had survived the night. That alone felt like a small victory. As she stepped into the hotel lobby, the air felt heavier than usual. Conversations paused when she passed. Eyes followed her movements. Some curious, some judgmental, some quietly cruel. She had become a story. Zuri lowered her gaze and walked faster. Her supervisor called her aside before she could reach the service elevator. The woman's expression was unreadable, neither warm nor harsh, just tired. Room assignments have changed, she said. You'll be covering the East Wing today. Zuri nodded. Yes, ma'am. No questions, no accusations, no mention of the night before. The silence was unsettling, but she accepted it gratefully. Silence meant survival. As she pushed her cart down the corridor, Zuri replayed every second of what had happened. The shock on Jabari's face, the anger, the way his expression had shifted just slightly when the manager spoke on her behalf. She did not know what that shift meant. She did not try to guess. People like him didn't change because of one exhausted cleaner. By mid-morning, her arms ached and her head throbbed. She paused briefly in the staff restroom, gripping the sink as a wave of dizziness passed. She waited until the room steadied before returning to work. Stopping for longer was not an option. Not. In another part of the hotel, Jabari Adeyemi sat alone in his suite, untouched breakfast growing cold on the table. He had barely slept. When he did, his dreams were restless, filled with unfinished conversations and a face that refused to fade. He told himself it was stress. He reviewed emails, signed documents, spoke with his assistant. Everything functioned as it always had. Yet his focus slipped again and again, drawn back to one thought he couldn't dismiss. She fainted, not pretended, not schemed. She collapsed. Jabari leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together. He had built his reputation on reading people, detecting weakness, anticipating deception. And yet when he replayed Zuri's reaction, there was no hint of manipulation. Only fear and exhaustion so deep it frightened him. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Yes, he called. The door opened to reveal a hotel attendant holding a tray. "Sir, you requested housekeeping service." Jabari hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed again. "Yes," he said finally. "Send Zuri." The attendant blinked. "Sir, you heard me." "Yes, sir." When the door closed, Jabari exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure why he'd asked for her. Curiosity, perhaps, or guilt, or something he didn't yet have a name for. Minutes later, the knock came again. Zuri stood at the door, her posture stiff, her expression carefully neutral. She kept her eyes on the floor. "You called for housekeeping, sir?" she asked quietly. Jabari nodded. "Come in." She entered, pushing the cart forward. Every movement was precise, controlled. She did not look at the bed, did not look at him. As she worked, the silence between them stretched thick, heavy, uncomfortable. "You didn't eat yesterday," Jabari said suddenly. Zuri paused for half a second, then continued, wiping the table. "I did, sir." "Lying doesn't suit you," he replied calmly. Her hands tightened around the cloth. "I wasn't hungry." Jabari studied her. "You fainted from exhaustion. That doesn't happen to people who are fine." She swallowed. "I'm used to it." That answer unsettled him more than he expected. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Because some people don't get the luxury of rest." The words hung in the air. Jabari felt something twist inside his chest. He wasn't accustomed to being spoken to like this, not rudely, but honestly, without fear, without flattery. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair near the window. Zuri stiffened. "I'm not allowed to sit in guest rooms. I'm allowing it." She shook her head gently. "I'd rather not, sir." For a moment, irritation flared in him. People usually obeyed him, instantly, without question. But instead of insisting, he nodded. "Very well." She finished her work quickly and efficiently, then turned to leave. "Zuri," he said. She stopped. "You should go home early today." Her shoulders tensed. "Am I in trouble?" "No." She glanced up at him, then confusion flickering across her face. "Take the rest of the day off," he repeated. "I'll inform your supervisor." She hesitated. "I need the hours." Jabari stood. "You need rest more." Zuri studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether this was kindness or a trap. "Thank you," she said finally, "but I can't." Then she left. Jabari remained standing long after the door closed. That night, Zuri returned home later than usual. Lami was coughing again, curled tightly under a thin blanket. Zuri knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from her sister's forehead. "Does it hurt?" she asked. a little Lami whispered. Did you get paid? Zuri forced a smile. Soon. The next morning, when Zuri opened her locker at work, she froze. Inside was a pharmacy bag. Her name was written on it in neat handwriting. Hands trembling, she looked around the empty room before slowly opening it. Inside were antibiotics, vitamins, and a printed receipt already paid. Zuri sank onto the bench, her breath catching in her throat. No note. No explanation, just help. She knew who it was. That day when she passed Jabari in the hallway, he didn't stop her. Didn't speak. He simply nodded, once his expression unreadable. Zuri nodded back. Nothing more was said, but something had changed. The judgment that once defined their interactions had softened into something quieter, something human. And though neither of them realized it yet, the distance between their worlds had begun to narrow, not through power or pity, but through a fragile, growing understanding. The days that followed settled into a strange, unspoken rhythm. Jabari Adeyemi remained in the presidential suite despite having no real reason to stay. His driver checked in every morning. His assistant reminded him that the mansion was ready whenever he wished to return. And yet each time the question came, Jabari postponed the decision. Extend my stay, he said, once his voice flat. For how long, sir? The receptionist asked. Jabari paused, staring out at the skyline of Lagos, the city pulsing with life below. Indefinitely. He told himself it was strategic. The investors might reschedule. The city was the center of operations. Staying put made sense. But deep down, he knew the truth was less practical and far more dangerous. He was waiting. Every morning he ordered breakfast at the same time, and every morning he added the same instruction. Send Zuri. The first time it happened after the pharmacy bag incident, Zuri nearly dropped the tray when her supervisor relayed the request. Her heart began to race even before she reached the elevator. She knocked softly. Come in, Jabari said. He stood by the window, phone in hand, pretending to read messages he had already memorized. Zuri entered quietly, placing the tray on the table as she always did. Her movements were careful, measured. She did not look at him. You didn't say thank you, Jabari said without turning. Zuri froze. For what, sir? He turned to face her. The medicine. Her breath caught. For a brief moment, the walls she kept so carefully built threatened to crumble. I didn't want to assume, she said softly. That would have been wiser, he replied. Then after a pause, but you assumed correctly. Silence stretched between them. My sister slept through the night, Zuri said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. For the first time in weeks. Jabari nodded once. Good. She waited, unsure what to say next. Gratitude felt too small for what he had done, and words felt dangerous, like they might invite expectations she couldn't afford. I'll finish up, she said, gesturing to the room. As she worked, Jabari watched her more openly now. Not with suspicion, not with authority, but with curiosity that had quietly shifted into concern. She moved like someone conserving energy, never wasting a step. Every motion had purpose. When she bent to straighten a rug, she paused briefly afterward, steadying herself. It was subtle, something most people would miss. Jabari didn't. You're still overworking, he said. Zuri straightened. I don't have a choice. That's what you said last time. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away. Because it's still true. Jabari exhaled slowly. Your supervisor told me you volunteered for another double shift. Zuri stiffened. She shouldn't have told you that. She didn't mean to, he replied. It came up. Her jaw tightened. I need the money. And when your body gives out again, he asked. She hesitated, then answered honestly. Then I'll deal with it. That answer unsettled him more than he liked. Jabari had grown up surrounded by contingency plans. If one deal failed, another waited. If one asset lost value, another compensated. Even mistakes were buffered by privilege. Zuri lived without buffers. "You don't ask for help," he said. "I don't have time to," she replied. He studied her for a long moment. "What if you did?" She shook her head immediately. "Help always comes with conditions." "Not always," he said. Zuri's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "In my experience, it does." The honesty of that statement struck him harder than any accusation. That evening, Jabari paced his suite long after the city lights had come alive. His mother had taught him that generosity was a tool, useful, controlled, strategic. You helped people when it strengthened your position. But what he felt now didn't fit into any strategy. It felt personal. He picked up the hotel phone, then set it down again. He walked to the window, then turned back. Finally, he grabbed a pen and a small piece of paper from the desk. The note was simple, handwritten. No logo, no title. "Meet me after your shift, garden entrance. You're not in trouble. J." He folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope, writing her name on the front with deliberate strokes. Later that night, when Zuri returned to the laundry room to put away her cart, she noticed the envelope tucked neatly beneath her folded uniform. Her heart stuttered. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Zuri stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the words. Her first instinct was fear. The second was refusal. She didn't belong in gardens with men like him. She belonged in shadows, in quiet corners, in places where expectations were low and survival was enough. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. That night, sleep refused to come. Zuri lay awake, listening to Lami's breathing, steady but fragile. Her mind raced with questions she had no answers to. Why was he interested? What did he want? And what would it cost her? When her shift finally ended the next day, Zuri stood at the staff exit, staring at the long path leading away from the hotel. Her feet felt heavy, unwilling to move. She could go home. Forget the note. Pretend it never happened. Instead, she found herself walking slowly toward the back garden. Jabari was already there, standing beneath a tall palm tree, checking his watch. When he looked up and saw her, something in his posture eased. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said quietly. "I almost didn't," Zuri replied, keeping her distance. "That would have been fair." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city softened by distance and greenery. "I won't take much of your time," Jabari said. "I just wanted to talk." Zuri folded her arms gently in front of her. "About what about you?" he answered honestly. "And where you come from." Her guard went up instantly. "Why? Because I realized I know nothing about the lives of the people who keep my world running," he said. "And I don't like that." Zuri studied his face. The sharp edges were still there, but something else had emerged beneath them. Something uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I don't want favors," she said carefully. "I'm not offering any," he replied. "I just want to understand." The word lingered between them. Understanding. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Not love, not trust, but a crack in the wall that had separated their worlds for so long. And once that crack appeared, it was impossible to ignore. From the moment Zuri walked away from the garden that evening, she knew something had shifted quietly, invisibly, but permanently. Nothing dramatic had happened. No promises were made. No hands had touched. And yet the air between her and Jabari felt different, charged with a question neither of them had dared to ask out loud. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with its usual rhythm. Elevators chimed, trays clinked. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. To anyone watching, it was just another day of business and routine. But beneath the polished surfaces, whispers moved faster than the staff cards. "Have you noticed he only asks for her?" They say she's in his room 3 times a day. Careful. People disappear for less. Zuri heard fragments of it all. She kept her head down, her pace steady, refusing to give the rumors shape by reacting to them. She had learned long ago that attention, good or bad, was dangerous for someone in her position. The safest place was invisibility. Yet invisibility was no longer an option. Jabari requested her again that morning, and the next, and the next. Breakfast, lunch, sometimes dinner, never late, never early, always brief, always controlled. At first, Zuri thought it might stop on its own, that whatever curiosity had gripped him would fade once reality set in. Men like him lived fast lives. They got bored easily. She was used to being overlooked. But Jabari didn't grow bored. He noticed things. He noticed when she skipped a step climbing the stairs, hiding a wince behind calm breathing. He noticed the way her voice softened when she spoke about her sister and hardened when she spoke about herself. He noticed how she never accepted water unless it was offered twice. How she never sat unless ordered, and even then rarely did. "You don't trust people easily," he said one afternoon, watching her straighten the flowers by the window. "I trust people to be themselves," she replied carefully. "That's usually enough." He frowned. Enough for what? To survive. Her honesty unsettled him. Jabari had spent his life surrounded by people who filtered their words, shaping every sentence to please or protect. Zuri did neither. She spoke only what she meant and nothing more. And somehow that frightened him. At night, alone in his suite, Jabari found his thoughts drifting back to her. He remembered the small house she had described in fragments, the way she spoke of Lami with fierce devotion, never self-pity. He replayed the sound of her footsteps in the hallway, the gentle knock that preceded her presence. "This is foolish," he muttered to himself more than once. He had faced corporate takeovers without fear. He had stared down hostile boards and predatory investors. But this quiet pull toward a woman whose world was nothing like his left him unsteady. Zuri, meanwhile, wrestled with her own unease. She needed the job, the money, the stability. And yet the attention she was receiving felt like a spotlight she could not escape. Every request from Jabari fed the rumors. Every envelope tip, always generous, always discreet, tightened the knot in her chest. She worried about intentions, about consequences, about the price she might be expected to pay later. Help always comes with conditions. The thought echoed in her mind whenever she folded her uniform at night. One afternoon, as she cleaned a neighboring suite, a co-worker cornered her near the service stairs. "You should be careful," the woman whispered. "Men like him don't notice girls like us unless they want something." Zuri forced a calm expression. "I'm just doing my job." The woman's eyes softened pity mixed with fear. "That's what I'm afraid of." Zuri said nothing. She pushed her cart away, refusing to let doubt seep into her spine. That evening, Jabari waited longer than usual. When Zuri arrived with dinner, he did not return immediately to his phone. Instead, he watched her set the tray down. "You're thinking of quitting," he said suddenly. Her hands stilled. "Why would you think that?" "Because people look at you like you don't belong," he replied. "And because you carry your dignity like armor. Armor gets heavy." She exhaled slowly. "I don't quit easily." That wasn't an answer. She met his gaze for the first time that day. "I can't afford to quit." Something in her eyes made his chest tighten. "I don't want you to feel trapped," Jabari said quietly. "Then don't pull me into something I didn't ask for," she replied, her voice steady but firm. The words landed between them with weight. Jabari nodded once. "Fair." After she left, he stood by the window longer than he intended to, watching the city pulse below. He realized then that what he felt wasn't curiosity anymore. It was attachment. The realization unsettled him deeply. He had always believed emotions were liabilities, soft spots competitors could exploit. His mother had taught him that early. Love complicated judgment. Attachment weakened resolve. Control was safety. And yet here he was, rearranging his days around the presence of one woman who refused to bend to his world. That night he made a decision. The next morning when Zuri arrived with breakfast, Jabari spoke before she could retreat into routine. "I'd like to take you home tomorrow," he said calmly. Her eyes widened. "Home?" "Yes," he replied. "I want to see where you live." The silence that followed was thick. "That's not a good idea," Zuri said finally. "I won't come inside," he assured her. "I won't tell anyone. I just want to understand your world." She shook her head. "Understanding doesn't change anything." "Maybe not," he said. "But ignorance guarantees nothing ever does." Zuri searched his face looking for entitlement, expectation, control. What she saw instead was something unfamiliar: restraint. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we don't tell anyone. And if I say stop, we stop." Jabari nodded without hesitation. Agreed. That afternoon as she walked away from his suite, Zuri's heart pounded with uncertainty. She did not know why she had agreed. She only knew that something about his quiet insistence felt different from the demands she had learned to fear. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought took root. Maybe not all attention was a threat, but as the whispers continued to grow louder and the distance between their worlds grew smaller, neither of them realized how fragile this balance truly was, or how quickly it could be shattered. The next day arrived with a tension neither of them spoke about. Zuri woke before dawn, her mind already racing. She moved quietly through the small room she shared with Lami, careful not to wake her sister. Outside, the city stretched awake, generators coughing to life, distant horns echoing like restless thoughts. Zuri washed, dressed, and stared at her reflection longer than usual. She chose the same faded sandals she always wore, the same simple dress she kept for after work. There was nothing to impress, nothing to hide behind. At the hotel, Jabari waited in the staff parking area beside a black SUV that looked out of place among delivery vans and mop buckets. He had dismissed his driver for the afternoon. This, he decided, was not a moment for witnesses. When Zuri appeared, she slowed instinctively. "You didn't bring guards," she said, half a question. "Not today," Jabari replied. "I promised." She nodded, relief flickering across her face before she masked it. Without another word, she climbed into the car. The vehicle moved slowly through the city, trading polished avenues for narrower roads. Glass towers gave way to concrete blocks. Billboards faded into hand-painted signs. Jabari watched it all in silence, as if the city were peeling back layers he had never bothered to see. "You can stop here," Zuri said when they reached the edge of her neighborhood. "I'll walk with you," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded. The street was loud and alive. Children ran barefoot between stalls. Women argued good-naturedly over prices. The air smelled of fried plantain dust and diesel. Jabari felt exposed, stripped of the invisible armor wealth usually wrapped around him. People stared, not in awe but curiosity. He was out of place and everyone knew it. They stopped in front of a small one-room house, its paint chipped, its gate held together with wire. "This is it," Zuri said softly. Before Jabari could respond, a coughing fit echoed from inside. Zuri rushed forward, pushing the door open. Lami, a thin girl, sat up on the mattress, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her sister. "You're back." "I brought nothing today," Zuri said gently, kneeling beside her. "But I will." Lami's gaze drifted to Jabari. "Who's he?" Zuri hesitated. "A friend from work," Jabari swallowed. "Hello," he said awkwardly. Lami smiled, then coughed again, the sound sharp and hollow. Jabari felt something crack. He had seen balance sheets that determined the fate of thousands. He had watched markets rise and fall. None of it prepared him for the sight of a child rationing breath. They did not stay long. Jabari kept his promise. On the drive back, neither of them spoke. That night, Jabari stood at his window longer than usual. The city lights blinked, but the image burned into his mind was the small room, the fragile girl, the quiet dignity of a woman who carried a world on her back without complaint. The next morning, Zuri found a pharmacy bag in her locker again. This time it included inhalers and a clinic receipt with a future appointment already booked. She pressed the bag to her chest and closed her eyes. Just for a moment. From then on, small miracles appeared without names attached. Groceries paid bills. Medicine refilled before it ran out. Jabari never mentioned them. Zuri never thanked him aloud. Gratitude lived in the way her shoulders finally relaxed in the steadier rhythm of Lami's breathing at night. Their meetings remained quiet. Late evenings in the back garden, short conversations by the service elevator. Words chosen carefully as if both knew how easily this fragile thing could break. One evening, Jabari spoke what had been circling his thoughts for days. "I don't usually feel this way," he said, staring at the palms overhead. "Which way?" Zuri asked. Uncertain. She studied him. "Welcome to my world." The honesty made him smile despite himself. Days passed. The hotel staff noticed the change in him before he did. He dressed softer, ate on time, smiled rarely but genuinely. Power no longer radiated from him like a weapon. It sat quieter now, tempered by something human. Then the jet landed. Mrs. Ifunanya Adeyemi returned to Nigeria 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Her presence was felt before it was seen. Conversations stiffened. Managers straightened. The lobby seemed to hold its breath as she entered, elegant and severe, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. She went straight to her son's suite. "Jabari," she said coolly when he opened the door. "We need to talk." Her eyes swept the room, taking in details most would miss. The absence of chaos, the warmth, the faint scent of jasmine that did not belong to him. "You're distracted," she said. "I'm focused," Jabari replied carefully. On what he did not answer. That was answer enough. Over the next day, she watched. She observed how he paused near the lobby, how his eyes followed a cleaner with a food tray, how his posture softened in her presence. By evening, Mrs. Adeyemi had drawn her conclusion. The next morning, Zuri received a note. This one was different, formal, precise. "You are invited for tea with Mrs. Adeyemi, Suite 1102, 4 p.m. sharp." Zuri's hands trembled. She did not tell Jabari. At 4 o'clock, she stood at the door, her spine straight, her heart pounding. Mrs. Adeyemi opened it herself, her smile flawless and empty. "Please," she said, "come in." Tea was served in fine china. Compliments were exchanged, questions asked gently like blades wrapped in silk. "You work hard," Mrs. Adeyemi said. "That's admirable. Thank you, ma'am, and you care for your sister." "Yes." "Good. Responsibility builds character." Then the warmth vanished. "Zuri," she said softly, "people like you don't belong in certain places." Zuri's fingers tightened around her cup. "I'm not unkind," the woman continued, "but kindness does not buy legacy. My son's world is not built for cleaners." Zuri set the cup down carefully. "I never asked for anything." Mrs. Adeyemi's gaze hardened. "Then don't mistake temporary kindness for a door that was never meant for you." Silence pressed in. Zuri stood. "I clean floors with dignity," she said quietly. "That is enough for me." She bowed her head slightly and walked out. The decision was made before she reached the hallway. That night, Zuri packed quietly. She left her badge on the table, took Lami's hand, and disappeared before morning. At sunrise, Jabari waited for a knock that never came. By 10, panic set in. She quit, the supervisor said. Left last night. The room felt empty in a way he had never known. When his phone rang and his mother's voice filled the silence, something inside him broke. "What did you say to her?" he demanded. "I gave her perspective. You humiliated her." She needed reminding. Jabari ended the call. He stood in the center of the suite, the city roaring outside, and understood the truth too late. Power had not brought him closer to love. It had almost destroyed it. Jabari Adeyemi had faced losses before. He had watched millions evaporate, and a bad quarter had closed factories that once hummed with life, had cut partnerships that took years to build. Loss to him had always been measured in numbers. Figures that hurt, but could be recovered, recalculated, replaced. This loss was different. The suite felt wrong without her presence. Too quiet, too clean. The air no longer carried the faint scent of detergent and jasmine that had somehow come to mean comfort. Jabari stood in the middle of the room, staring at the door as if Zuri might still walk through it. Cart rolling softly behind her, eyes lowered but spirit unbroken. She didn't. By noon, the truth had settled heavily in his chest. Zuri hadn't taken a day off. She hadn't transferred departments. She had left, gone without a word. Jabari stormed through the hotel corridors, his usual composed stride replaced by urgency. He questioned supervisors, housekeeping staff, anyone who might know something. She didn't say where she was going, one cleaner whispered. She just said she was done. Another shook her head. She looked resolved. Resolved. The word echoed painfully in his mind. He left the hotel without waiting for his driver, sliding into the SUV himself. Lagos traffic swallowed him, but for once he didn't care about delays. He drove to the address Zuri had shown him, hoping irrationally that she might still be there. The small house was empty. The gate hung open, slightly creaking in the breeze. A neighbor leaned against a wall nearby, watching him with guarded curiosity. "She left last night," the woman said before he could ask. "Took the girl. Didn't say where." "Did she seem upset?" Jabari asked. The woman considered him. "She seemed tired," she replied, "and proud." Those two words cut deeper than accusation ever could. Jabari returned to his mansion that evening, but it did not feel like home. The wide halls echoed with absence. The polished floors reflected nothing of warmth. For the first time, wealth felt hollow, an impressive shell with nothing alive inside. Days passed. Jabari threw himself into work, desperate for distraction. Meetings filled his schedule. Contracts demanded attention. His assistant praised his renewed focus, mistaking his intensity for ambition. But no amount of work quieted the questions clawing at his mind. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she leave without giving me a chance to explain? What did my mother say to her? The answer arrived one evening, uninvited. His phone rang. His mother's name flashed on the screen. "I hope you've come back to your senses," Mrs. Ifunanya Adeyemi said coolly when he answered. "Did you speak to Zuri?" Jabari asked, skipping pleasantries. A pause. Measured. Deliberate. "I offered her clarity," his mother replied. "Something you were too distracted to provide." "What did you say to her?" His voice hardened. "I reminded her of her place," she said calmly. "Of reality. Some women are temporary, Jabari. They pass through our lives to teach lessons, not to stay." Something inside him snapped. "You humiliated her," he said flatly. "You erased her." "She's a cleaner," his mother replied sharply. "Our world was never meant for her." "Then I want no part of your world," Jabari said, the words steady but final. Silence crackled on the line. "You would choose her over your legacy?" she asked. "I would choose decency," he answered. The call ended without goodbye. Jabari sank onto the bed, the same bed Zuri had once fainted on. He stared at the ceiling, feeling a weight he had never known before. Not fear, not anger, regret. He opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay the silver necklace he had planned to give her, a simple piece chosen carefully, deliberately. It glittered under the light, beautiful and useless. Without her, it meant nothing. That night, Jabari made a decision. He would find her, not because he felt guilty, not because he wanted to fix a mistake, but because the world without Zuri in it felt fundamentally wrong. The search was harder than he imagined. Zuri had left no digital trace, no social media footprint, no forwarding address. Her phone number rang unanswered, then went dead. Even private investigators hit walls. In a city as vast and crowded as Lagos, a woman who wanted to disappear could do so easily. Weeks turned into a month. Jabari grew quieter, thinner. His colleagues noticed the change but did not dare ask. Power still surrounded him, but it no longer defined him. He began to see it for what it was, a tool, not a shield. One evening, standing on his balcony, Jabari looked up at the stars barely visible through the city haze. Zuri, he whispered. The name tasted like a promise he had failed to keep. Behind him, his assistant cleared his throat. Sir, the new international contract needs your signature. Jabari turned slowly. Do you believe, he asked unexpectedly, that some people only come into our lives once? The assistant blinked, startled. Sir, never mind, Jabari said quietly. He signed the papers without looking at them. That night, Jabari packed a small bag. He canceled meetings, cleared his schedule indefinitely. I'm going to find her, he told his assistant. Sir, where will you start? Everywhere, Jabari replied. Zuri Okori had vanished without a trace. But Jabari Adeyemi was no longer the man who believed control was everything. He was willing to give up time, comfort, and reputation if it meant one chance to stand before her again, not as a billionaire, not as a savior, but as a man who had finally learned the cost of silence. What Jabari didn't yet know was this: Zuri's disappearance was not just an act of self-preservation. It hid truths far deeper than pride alone. And when their paths crossed again, the power he once relied on would be useless. Because love once wounded does not return unchanged. Zuri did not look back when the bus pulled away from Lagos. She sat by the window, Lami asleep against her shoulder, the city shrinking into a blur of concrete and dust behind them. The engine roared, drowning out the thoughts she had been holding back since the night she walked away from the hotel. Only then, when distance finally stood between her and everything she had known, did she allow herself to breathe. Leaving had not been impulsive. It had been necessary. Zuri had spent her life learning how to endure, how to stay quiet, how to survive humiliation, how to accept help without losing herself. But the words spoken to her over tea had crossed a line she could not uncross. Stay in your place. Those words had not been shouted. They had not been cruel in tone, and that was what made them dangerous. They carried the weight of generations of invisible walls that no amount of kindness could soften. Zuri understood something in that moment that Jabari had not yet grasped. As long as she remained near him, she would always be an argument someone else could silence. So she chose distance. The bus carried them east toward a smaller city where no one knew her name, her face, or her past. Zuri had once worked briefly in the area years ago, cleaning a roadside clinic for cash. It was not a dream destination. It was simply quieter. When they arrived, the sun was already high. Zuri stepped down from the bus with one small bag, Lami's hand tightly clasped in hers. The air felt different, less rushed, less heavy. They found a room to rent behind a tailoring shop, barely larger than the one they had left, but cheaper and closer to the clinic. Zuri paid in advance with what little savings she had left and thanked the woman as if she had been given a palace. That first night, Lami slept deeply. Zuri did not. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories she had tried to bury. Jabari's voice when he spoke her name, the way his eyes softened when he listened. the gentleness he tried and sometimes failed to hide. She pressed her lips together, forcing the thoughts away. Kindness does not erase distance, she reminded herself. The next morning, Zuri went looking for work. She walked from shop to shop, clinic to clinic, offering her hands, her time, her willingness. Most places turned her away politely. A few did not bother hiding their disinterest. She kept going. By afternoon, exhaustion crept in. She sat on a low wall outside a small private clinic, rubbing her temples. "You clean?" a woman asked from the doorway. Zuri looked up quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Anything. Cleaning, laundry errands." The woman studied her for a moment. "We need help. Pay is small." "I'll take it," Zuri said immediately. The work was harder than the hotel. The floors were rougher, the hours longer. But there was something different here, something grounding. Patients greeted her. Nurses learned her name. No one looked at her like she didn't belong. Within a week, Zuri had secured extra hours helping at a food stall nearby. The money was modest, but enough. Enough for food, enough for medicine, enough for dignity. Lami's condition improved steadily. The new clinic monitored her closely, adjusting her medication. She laughed more, ate more, slept without waking in the night. Watching her sister heal brought Zuri a quiet peace she had not known in years. And yet at night, when the world slowed, her thoughts betrayed her. She wondered if Jabari had noticed her absence yet, if he had asked questions, if he had believed she simply vanished without reason. She told herself it didn't matter. He lived in a world that could absorb loss. She lived in one where loss could break you. Back in Lagos, Jabari's search grew more intense. He traveled through neighborhoods he had never set foot in before, asking questions that startled people unused to being seen by men like him. He followed leads that went nowhere, knocked on doors that never opened. He began to understand how easily someone like Zuri could disappear, not because she was hiding, but because the world had never learned to look for people like her. One afternoon, a private investigator finally brought him something. She took a bus east, the man said, paid cash, no return ticket, likely with her sister. "Where did she go?" Jabari asked. The man shook his head. "Hard to say. She didn't leave a trail." Jabari nodded slowly. "Then we keep looking." Days later, another clue surfaced, a clinic, a small one. A nurse who remembered a quiet woman who worked too hard and asked for nothing. Jabari drove for hours. When he arrived, he did not announce himself. He did not bring gifts or guards or authority. He waited outside, watching people move in and out of the building. Then he saw her. Zuri stepped out into the sunlight, a small bag slung over her shoulder, her hair tied back. She looked thinner, perhaps. Tired, but stronger. For a moment, Jabari could not move. She was real, alive, not a ghost haunting his memory. He took a step forward, then another. Zuri felt it before she saw him, that familiar shift in the air, the sense of being watched not with judgment but recognition. She turned, their eyes met. The world seemed to pause, neither spoke. The distance between them was not just physical. It was layered with silence, pain, and unspoken truths. Jabari's heart pounded as he realized how unprepared he was for this moment. "Zuri," he said finally, her name breaking slightly as it left his lips. She did not smile. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I needed to find you." She studied him, searching his face for arrogance, for entitlement. What she found instead unsettled her more. Regret. "I didn't leave to be found," she said. "I didn't come to force you back," Jabari said softly. "I came to listen." Silence stretched between them, again familiar, heavy. Zuri exhaled slowly. "Some worlds don't overlap," she said, "no matter how much we want them to." "Then let me stand where you are," he replied, "just for a moment." Her expression wavered. She had walked away to protect herself, to protect her sister, to protect something fragile she had only just begun to recognize in herself. And yet seeing him there alone, stripped of power, made it harder to pretend he was just another man who would never understand. "This doesn't fix anything," she warned. "I'm not asking it to," Jabari said. "I just don't want silence to be the end of us." Zuri looked away, her chest tightening. The world she had run toward had given her peace, but the world she had run from had followed her, changed, humbled, and uncertain. And for the first time since she left, Zuri wondered if leaving had been the end, or merely the beginning of a harder truth. Zuri did not invite Jabari inside. She did not have to say no out loud. The way she stepped back, positioning herself between him and the clinic door, was answer enough. Jabari understood immediately. He nodded once, accepting the boundary without argument. "Can we walk?" he asked, "just for a few minutes." Zuri hesitated. The afternoon sun burned overhead and the street was busy enough to make running away impossible without causing a scene. She exhaled slowly. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all." They walked side by side, not touching, their steps uneven at first, like two people relearning an old rhythm. Jabari noticed everything: the way her shoulders stayed tense, the way her eyes scanned the street, automatically alert, protective. "You look different," he said carefully. "So do you," Zuri replied. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a compliment either. It was an observation. Jabari looked less polished, less armored. The sharp certainty that once clung to him like a second skin had softened. "I didn't know she would speak to you," he said quietly. Zuri stopped walking. "She didn't raise her voice," Zuri replied. "That's what people don't understand. She didn't have to." Jabari swallowed. "I confronted her. That doesn't undo what was said." "I know." They stood there, the noise of the street filling the space between them. "I left because I had to," Zuri continued. "Not because I didn't care, but because staying meant slowly disappearing." Jabari closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't see it. And that's on me." She studied his face. There was no defense in his voice, no attempt to minimize her pain. "I didn't come to take you back," he said. "I didn't even come to ask you to forgive me." "Then why are you here?" she asked. "Because silence felt like erasing you," he answered. "And I couldn't live with that." Zuri looked away, blinking hard. "I built my life on control," Jabari continued. "I thought power could fix anything. But the moment I tried to protect you with it, I failed you." She laughed softly, not in humor, but in disbelief. "Most men never realize that. I'm realizing it now." They resumed walking. At the edge of the street, Zuri stopped again. "You can't help me here," she said. "I already found work. My sister is stable. I don't need rescuing." "I know," Jabari replied. "That's why I won't." She turned to face him fully. "Then what do you want from me?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Honesty, time, and the chance to know you on your terms." Zuri searched his eyes, looking for the hidden condition she had learned to expect. She found none. "That's dangerous," she said quietly. "So is pretending this meant nothing." She looked past him toward the clinic where Lami waited, toward the life she had rebuilt with fragile care. "I won't quit my job," she said firmly. "I won't move. I won't hide. I wouldn't ask you to. And I won't be a secret." Jabari nodded. "Then I'll walk in the light with you. Or not at all." The words landed with weight. For the first time since he arrived, Zuri felt something loosen in her chest. "Come back tomorrow," she said after a long pause. "If you still want to talk." Jabari allowed himself a small, restrained smile. "I will." That night, Zuri lay awake again, but this time the weight in her chest was not fear. It was uncertainty edged with hope. Over the following weeks, Jabari returned often, not with grand gestures, not with solutions. He came with questions, with patience, with silence when words were too heavy. He sat on low benches outside the clinic. He helped carry water without complaint. He listened when Zuri spoke about her parents, about the years of holding herself together so her sister wouldn't fall apart. He never offered money, and that more than anything changed how she saw him. One evening as they walked back from the market, Zuri spoke softly. "You know, helping without announcing it is harder than people think." Jabari nodded. "I'm learning." Lami noticed too. "You're different," she told Jabari one afternoon, her voice stronger now. "You don't look at my sister like she's broken." Jabari smiled gently. "She's not." Zuri turned away quickly, afraid of what he might see in her eyes. The necklace appeared one night beneath Zuri's pillow, simple, silver, unassuming. There was no card, just a quiet understanding, not payment, not a promise. She held it against her chest and cried, not from gratitude alone, but from the unfamiliar relief of being seen without being owned. Back in Lagos, Mrs. Ifunanya Adeyemi waited. She watched the news, the markets. Her son's absence from social events did not go unnoticed. When Jabari finally returned her call, his voice was calm but changed. "I won't pretend this didn't cost you," he said. "But I won't abandon myself to please you." "You are choosing instability," she replied coolly. "No," he said. "I'm choosing integrity." Silence followed. Love, Zuri realized, was not loud. It did not arrive with answers or erase differences. It did not rescue. It stayed. And for the first time in her life, Zuri allowed herself to believe that staying on her own terms might not be a weakness at all. The rhythm of Zuri's new life was modest, steady, and hard-earned. Mornings began before sunrise. She prepared Lami's medication, walked her to the clinic when necessary, then worked long hours cleaning floors that never truly stayed clean. In the evenings, she cooked simple meals and listened to her sister talk about school friends and dreams that finally sounded possible again. Jabari did not disrupt that rhythm. He fit himself into the edges of her days with deliberate care, as if afraid that moving too fast might break something fragile. He came without announcements, without gifts, without demands. Sometimes he sat quietly while Zuri folded laundry. Other times they walked in silence, letting the sound of footsteps replace words that felt too heavy. What grew between them was not dramatic. It was intentional. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft orange, Zuri finally said the thing she had been holding back. "I don't want to disappear again," she said, staring ahead. Jabari stopped walking. "I don't want you to." "That's not what I mean." She turned to face him. "I won't shrink myself to fit into anyone's world, not yours, not your mother's, not society's." He nodded slowly. "Then don't." She studied his face, searching for resistance. "If we do this," she continued, "I stay where I am. I keep working. I take care of my sister. I won't become dependent on you." Jabari answered without hesitation. "I respect that." Zuri blinked. "Just like that, I've spent my life confusing control with care," he said quietly. "I won't make that mistake again." Her breath caught. No man had ever said that to her, not with conviction, not without conditions. Still, caution lived deep in her bones. "My life is small," she warned. "There's no glamour here, no comfort, no safety net." Jabari smiled faintly. "I'm not here for comfort." They stood there, the space between them narrowing, not physically but emotionally. The decision forming was not about romance alone. It was about trust, about whether two people from opposite ends of the world could stand side by side without one overshadowing the other. "I need time," Zuri said at last. "Take all of it," Jabari replied. Their relationship unfolded quietly. There were no public declarations, no photographs, no rumors fed to the press. They learned each other through ordinary moments, burnt meals, long walks, shared laughter that arrived unexpectedly and stayed longer than planned. Jabari learned how to listen without fixing. Zuri learned how to accept care without surrendering her independence. Slowly, carefully, love took shape not as a rescue but as a partnership. Back in Lagos, Mrs. Ifunanya Adeyemi watched her son from a distance. She noticed the changes even before they were confirmed. Jabari stopped attending certain social functions. He delegated more. He refused invitations that once would have thrilled him. When she finally confronted him in person, she saw something unsettling in his eyes. Peace. "This woman has changed you," she said coolly. "Yes," Jabari replied. "She has. And you see that as a good thing, I see it as necessary." Mrs. Adeyemi straightened. "You are jeopardizing your standing, your future." "My future should not require someone else's humiliation," he answered. The room fell silent. She had raised him to be unbreakable. What she hadn't anticipated was that integrity could look like defiance. "You are choosing a difficult path," she said at last. "So did you," Jabari replied gently. "You just chose power over tenderness." The words landed harder than any argument. Zuri sensed the tension before Jabari spoke of it. "She won't stop," Zuri said quietly one night, her voice more tired than afraid. "I know," he replied, "and I won't ask you to fight her." "I don't want to fight anyone," Zuri said. "I just want to live." Jabari reached for her hand, stopping just short, giving her the space to choose. She took it. The gesture was small. The meaning was not. Weeks passed. Lami's health improved enough for her to return to school full-time. Zuri received a modest raise at the clinic. Life for the first time felt balanced, not easy but honest. One evening, as they sat outside watching the streetlights flicker on, Jabari spoke with unusual seriousness. "I need to be clear about something," he said. "If this becomes harder for you than it should be, I will step back. Not because I don't care, but because I refuse to be another burden in your life." Zuri looked at him for a long moment. "No one has ever offered me that choice," she said softly. "I'm offering it now." She leaned back, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. "Then hear this," she said. "I'm not afraid of difficulty. I'm afraid of being erased. You won't be," Jabari promised. "Not with me." That night, Zuri allowed herself to imagine a future, not a fantasy, not a fairy tale, but a shared path where neither of them had to disappear for the other to exist. It scared her. It also healed something she hadn't known was broken. Love, she realized, did not require sacrifice of self. It required recognition. And as Jabari walked back to his temporary apartment that evening, he understood something that had taken him a lifetime to learn. True power was not the ability to control outcomes. It was the courage to choose someone without owning them. Mrs. Ifunanya Adeyemi had not built her life on chance. Every step she took, from her early days navigating male-dominated boardrooms to her eventual rise as a respected power broker, had been calculated, controlled, and fiercely protected. She believed in structure, in hierarchy, in knowing exactly where everyone belonged. That belief had shaped her son as much as any inheritance ever could. So when Jabari stopped returning her calls on schedule, she noticed. When his attendance at society functions declined, she noticed. When whispers reached her ears, quiet ones, careful ones, about her son spending time far from Lagos, far from the world she had crafted for him, she did more than notice. She prepared. Mrs. Adeyemi arrived unannounced at Jabari's Lagos mansion one afternoon, her presence filling the space before she even spoke. The staff straightened instinctively. Old habits died hard. Jabari met her in the living room, his expression calm but guarded. "You've been avoiding me," she said flatly. "I've been living," he replied. She studied him, noting the difference in his posture, the absence of tension she had once mistaken for strength. "That woman," she said, "she's still in your life?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer irritated her. "You're risking everything," Mrs. Adeyemi said. "Your reputation, your legacy." Jabari held her gaze. "I'm redefining it. She laughed softly without humor. You think this is love? This is infatuation mixed with guilt. It's neither, he replied. It's choice. Mrs. Adeyemi stepped closer. Choice has consequences, and I won't sit by while you dismantle what took decades to build. The threat was subtle but clear. Zuri felt the shift long before it reached her directly. It came in the form of silence from the clinic's management. Meetings postponed, decisions delayed. Then a polite conversation with a supervisor who suddenly seemed uncomfortable. We've received inquiries, the woman said carefully. About your background. Zuri's chest tightened. From who the supervisor hesitated. People who ask very precise questions. That night, Zuri told Jabari everything. She's doing this because of me, Zuri said quietly. Jabari's jaw tightened. She's doing it because she believes she can. I don't want your war, Zuri continued. I don't want to be a battlefield. You're not, Jabari said, and I won't let her hurt you. Zuri shook her head. You can't protect me from everything, and I won't let your mother destroy your world for me. Jabari reached for her hands. My world isn't fragile. She met his eyes. Then don't make me the test. The next move came swiftly. Mrs. Adeyemi arranged a private dinner with influential partners, one Zuri was never meant to attend. Her name was not mentioned directly, but implications filled the room. A distraction, someone said lightly. A liability, another agreed. By morning, the rumor mill was alive. Jabari responded publicly, something he had never done before. In a board meeting filled with men who had watched him grow up, he spoke clearly and without apology. My personal life is not a weakness, he said. If any of you believe integrity is negotiable, then perhaps our partnership is. Silence followed. Some were impressed, others unsettled. Zuri watched from afar, her heart heavy with conflict. She did not want to be the reason he lost respect or power. She had spent her life surviving systems that crushed people like her. She knew how merciless they could be. I can walk away, she said one evening, her voice steady but her eyes tired. Before this becomes uglier. Jabari answered without raising his voice. You are not a problem to be solved. I don't want to cost you everything. You won't, he said, because I won't trade my values to keep comfort. Mrs. Adeyemi saw the line being drawn and she did not like it. She requested one final meeting with Zuri. This time there was no tea, no pleasantries. I underestimated you, Mrs. Adeyemi said coldly. I thought fear would send you running. Zuri met her gaze calmly. I left once, not because I was afraid, because I had dignity. Mrs. Adeyemi smiled thinly. Dignity doesn't change reality. Neither does power, Zuri replied. It only delays truth. The older woman leaned in. You will never belong. Zuri exhaled slowly. I don't need to. The conversation ended without resolution. That night, Jabari made his decision. He stepped away from several high-profile roles. Reduced public appearances, reorganized his responsibilities. The media speculated, the board murmured. His mother watched furious and beneath it afraid. You're choosing her, she said during their last call. I'm choosing myself, Jabari replied. And she happens to walk beside me. The distance between mother and son widened not from hatred but from incompatible visions of the world. Zuri felt the pressure ease, but the cost weighed heavily. I never wanted this, she said quietly. I know, Jabari answered, but sometimes love doesn't ask permission before changing everything. Zuri looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had stepped out of the shadow of expectation into uncertainty. For her, for himself. She took his hand. I'm still here, she said. And for the first time, Jabari believed the hardest part was not choosing love. It was protecting it from the people who believed they owned him. The pressure did not explode all at once. It pressed, slowly, relentlessly. Zuri felt it in the way conversations around her shortened, in the pauses before people answered her questions, in the way the clinic administrator avoided eye contact when handing her schedules. Nothing obvious, nothing she could point to and accuse. Just enough resistance to remind her that power rarely announced itself, it suffocated quietly. She had lived this way before. The difference now was that she was no longer alone. One evening after Lami had fallen asleep, Zuri sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jabari watched her from across the room, sensing the weight she carried, but waiting for her to speak. "I don't want to keep fighting shadows," she said at last. "I don't want every step of my life questioned because of who I care about." Jabari's jaw tightened. "Then we stop the shadows." She shook her head. "That's not how this works. Shadows exist because light threatens something." He moved closer. "Then let me be the one threatened." Zuri looked up sharply. "No, I won't let you destroy yourself to protect me." "I'm not destroying myself," he replied quietly. "I'm choosing what matters." She stood. "And what happens when your world decides I'm too expensive to keep?" The question hung between them, raw, unguarded. Jabari did not answer immediately, because for the first time he could not lie to either of them. The next morning the call came. Mrs. Ifunanya Adeyemi requested a family meeting. Not an argument, not a negotiation, a decision. Jabari went alone. The house he grew up in felt colder than he remembered, larger, more distant. His mother waited in the sitting room, composed as ever, dressed in neutral tones that had once symbolized authority and safety. "You forced my hand," she said calmly. "I never wanted a war," Jabari replied. "Neither did I," she said. "But you've chosen chaos." He met her gaze. "I've chosen humanity." She stood, walking slowly to the window. "You think the world will change because you love a cleaner." "She's not a cleaner," he said firmly. "She's a woman." Mrs. Adeyemi turned back to him. "And that woman will always be used against you." "Then let them try." Her expression hardened. "If you continue down this path, I will step back completely. No protection, no influence, no buffer when things turn ugly." Jabari nodded. "I accept that." For the first time, something like shock crossed her face. "You would throw away everything?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm finally keeping what matters." When he returned that evening, Zuri saw it immediately, the weight in his eyes, the finality. "She gave you an ultimatum," Zuri said. "Yes." "And I chose you," he answered. Zuri closed her eyes. The words she had once longed to hear now terrified her. That night, Zuri could not sleep. She lay awake listening to Lami's breathing, thinking of all the times pride had cost people their futures. She had escaped one cage already. She would not step into another, even one built from love. Before dawn, she made her decision. She packed quietly. Not everything. Just enough. When Jabari woke and found her folding clothes, panic surged through him. "No," he said immediately. "Don't do this." "I have to," she replied calmly. "Because I love you." The words landed like a blow. "I won't be the reason you lose your family, your name, your protection," she continued. "I won't let your sacrifice become my guilt." Jabari stepped closer. "You don't get to decide this alone." "I do," Zuri said gently. "Because this is the only power I've ever truly had." Tears burned in her eyes, but none fell. "This isn't goodbye forever," she added. "This is me choosing dignity again." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Let me go while we still recognize each other," she whispered. By the time the sun rose, Zuri was gone. Again. But this time she left a letter. Jabari found it on the table, folded neatly, her handwriting steady. She did not apologize. She did not beg. She wrote of love that refused to become ownership, of strength that chose distance over destruction, of a hope that one day the world might be kinder. but until then she would protect what little peace she had built. Jabari sat with the letter long after the room grew quiet. For the first time, power felt useless. Weeks passed. Zuri moved again farther this time. A different city, a smaller life, work that paid little but came without questions. Lami adjusted quickly, children often did. Zuri carried love like a scar, proof that something real had happened, even if it could not stay. Back in Lagos, Jabari faced the consequences of his choice. Contracts shifted, allies distanced themselves. His mother kept her silence loud, deliberate, permanent. Yet something inside him did not break. He had lost comfort, he had lost approval, but he had not lost himself. One night, standing alone on his balcony, Jabari whispered into the darkness, not knowing if the words would ever reach her. "I'm still here." Far away in a small room lit by a single bulb, Zuri paused mid-step, her chest tightening for reasons she could not explain. Some bonds do not need proximity to exist, and sometimes love does not end with togetherness but with truth strong enough to survive separation. Zuri learned how to live with absence. At first it felt like carrying a weight she could not put down, heavy in the mornings, heavier at night. But life, as it always did, demanded attention. Lami needed stability. School fees had to be paid. Work needed to be done. Healing did not ask permission to be postponed. They settled in a quiet town where no one knew her story and no one asked questions. Zuri cleaned offices in the mornings and helped at a small food stall in the evenings. The work was exhausting but honest. Each day ended with tired muscles and a clear conscience. Lami thrived. Her laughter returned fully now, unburdened by sickness and fear. She made friends quickly, talked endlessly about school, and dreamed aloud about becoming a nurse someday. Zuri listened, smiling, storing those dreams like treasures. Still, on certain nights when the town fell quiet and the stars appeared brighter than they ever had in Lagos, Zuri allowed herself to remember. Jabari's voice, his patience, the way he learned to stand beside her without stepping ahead. She never regretted leaving, but she missed him. Back in Lagos, Jabari Adeyemi faced the slow unraveling of a life built on old definitions of success. His mother kept her distance, her silence louder than any argument. Board members questioned his priorities, invitations stopped coming. The world that once welcomed him without question now watched him carefully, waiting to see whether he would bend back into shape. He did not. Jabari worked differently now. He reduced unnecessary expansions, redirected investments into community health care and worker protections, quiet changes that didn't earn headlines but shifted lives. Some called it weakness. Others called it growth. He didn't correct them. He carried Zuri's letter with him everywhere, folded, creased. Read so many times it felt memorized. It reminded him of what love looked like when stripped of ego and control. One evening, months after she disappeared, Jabari received an unexpected call. It was from an old acquaintance, someone who had once worked quietly in the background of his mother's world. "She's been interfering," the man said carefully. "Not just with you." Jabari stiffened. "Explain." "Women like her," the man continued. "Your mother has made a habit of removing them from certain paths, blocking opportunities, applying pressure where it hurts." Something inside Jabari went cold. "She followed Zuri," he said. "Yes." The truth hit him harder than anything before. Zuri hadn't just left to protect herself. She had been pushed again. This time Jabari did not hesitate. He confronted his mother directly. "You didn't stop," he said, his voice controlled but sharp. "Even after I stepped away." Mrs. Adeyemi met his gaze evenly. "I finished what I started. You hurt her," he said. "I protected you." "No," Jabari replied. "You protected your pride." The argument that followed was quiet but devastating. No shouting, no theatrics, just truths finally spoken without fear. For the first time, Jabari said, "I see how much damage control has done in the name of love." Mrs. Adeyemi did not respond. She didn't have to. The distance between them was now permanent. Jabari acted quickly. He used his influence not to dominate, but to expose. Records were reviewed, patterns uncovered, pressure points revealed. Quiet abuses of power brought into the light not through scandal but through accountability. And then when everything was finally still, he went to find Zuri again, not as a billionaire chasing redemption, not as a man demanding answers, but as someone ready to stand fully in truth. It took time, but one afternoon he found her. She was standing outside a small school waiting for Lami. Her face softened by the sun, her posture relaxed in a way he had never seen before. He stopped several steps away. "Zuri," he said gently. She turned. For a moment, neither spoke. "You shouldn't be here," she said, not harshly but cautiously. "I know," Jabari replied, "but this time I came with nothing to take." She studied him carefully. "I know what she did," he continued, "and I stopped it. Not for us, for you." Zuri's breath caught. "Why now?" "Because silence no longer felt like respect," he answered. "It felt like cowardice." She looked away, gathering herself. "I won't come back," she said quietly. "Not to that world." "I'm not asking you to," Jabari replied. "I'm asking if I can meet you where you are." Zuri searched his face. "No promises?" she asked. "None," he said. "Only honesty." A long pause. Then she nodded once. They sat on a low wall as children spilled out of the schoolyard. Lami spotted Zuri and ran toward her, laughing. She stopped short when she saw Jabari, eyes widening. "You came back," she said simply. "Yes," Jabari replied. "If that's okay." Lami smiled. "I think it is." Zuri laughed softly, tears finally escaping. This time no one disappeared. They rebuilt slowly, not a fairy tale, not a miracle, but a shared life shaped by boundaries, truth, and respect. Jabari never asked Zuri to be less. Zuri never asked Jabari to give up everything. They chose each other not as savior and survivor, not as rich and poor, but as equals. And in doing so, they proved something quietly powerful. That love does not need to conquer to be real. That dignity is not something wealth can buy. And that when truth finally stands in the light, even the strongest walls built by pride must fall. This story reminds us that life rarely changes because of grand gestures or sudden miracles. It changes through quiet choices made in difficult moments. Zuri never asked to be saved. She asked only to be respected. And Jabari did not become a better man because he had power, but because he learned when not to use it. Their journey teaches us that dignity is not something given by wealth, status, or approval from powerful people. It is something we carry within ourselves even when the world tries to strip it away. Real love does not demand sacrifice of identity. It does not silence one person so another can shine. True love listens. It waits. It grows without ownership and protects without control. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away to protect our self-worth. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is return not to claim someone but to meet them as equals. This story is also a reminder that injustice often hides behind polite words and social structures, but kindness and truth have a way of exposing it over time. No matter where you come from, your story matters. Your voice matters. And choosing dignity, even when it costs you comfort, is never a mistake. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from and what lesson stood out most to you? And if you believe in stories that speak about justice, love, and hope, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.